Welcome to my Ruby Slippers. I am Lily Strong from the blog Lily Strong. And I have with me
Cilly
Strong, my most favorite middle child.
Wow.
You really are.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
We both have gone through interesting life experiences.
One way of putting it.
Things that I wouldn't wish on anyone else.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful that we've had each other to kind of lean on. And I think it's just really interesting to hear our different perspectives because I am the adult.
I'm an adult too at this point.
And this is my child. So we have just differing perspectives.
Perspectives on the same events and...
Yeah. So our hope is we want to talk a little bit about things that affect our mental health and how we got here and how we deal with it. And we kind of figured between the two of us, you'll probably be able to relate to one or the other. Something like that.
Maybe.
So I decided on the name Ruby Slippers because of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. She goes through the whole movie trying to get back home, and at the very end she discovers that she had the power all along. She had her ruby slippers on her feet. She just didn't know how to use them. And I feel that in my experience, I was in an abusive relationship, in a toxic environment, and I didn't think I had any power. I didn't realize that I did have a power there. And even though it's not easy, everyone does have the power to make choices, even when they're difficult. And so I really liked the way the Ruby Slippers kind of encapsulate that. It's like a constant reminder that we may not realize that we have the power, but we do.
We do.
Which is pretty awesome. So, for our first topic, we're going to talk about boundaries.
Boundaries.
Which
I think is also, like, connected to that whole idea of, like, you have the power. It's just not always something that you realize you can change. What the relationship looks like or how people treat you.
When I kind of waded into these waters of mental health, I thought I was knowledgeable and I really wasn't.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found out I was completely ignorant about was boundaries. I thought boundaries, and I had even read like parenting books that talked about boundaries and all that, which is why you turned out so well.
Right.
But I really misunderstood that boundaries are a way to have power over my own agency.
Yeah.
And so that's been one of the things that has been eye-opening for me, was learning what boundaries really are.
Right.
So we're not like sitting here with a dictionary or anything like that. What would be your take on boundaries?
And neither are we mental health professionals. I think with boundaries are about what you do, your power, as you said, over your own agency. But it's like this idea of, if you do this, or if you talk this way with me or do this action, I am going to have a negative response or whatever. I know that's one of those big misconceptions because people like to use the word boundaries when they mean controlling other people.
It's interesting.
Yeah, because they'll say like, oh, it's my boundary that you can't dress like that.
Oh, okay.
And so I think that also puts like a weird, because when you hear people talking about boundaries that way, it's like, okay, that's just like a weird way of being controlling, and personally I'm not comfortable with that. You learn boundaries because it is genuinely being allowed to, oh, these people said something horrible in front of me. I have the power to get up and leave that situation. Mm-hmm. I don't have to sit there and take it.
Right.
And that's been a really helpful part for me because, again, we went through our abuse, and a big thing was always, I didn't have a choice. Mm-hmm. I had to sit there and take, his stupid lectures or, physical touch that I didn't want, things like that. And it's about being able to be like, I've told you that's not something that I'm cool with. so I'm going to have a negative response.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, you set the expectation. I mean, I think that's a lot like parenting. I'm sure a lot of the parenting advice that you've been given.
It is, yeah. Which kind of brings me to a little tangent, which I tend to go on tangents
between us. Crazy.
That is something that we have obviously different perspectives on right there, because I was married to a person that was unhealthy, but that person was your father, and so you were in the position of not having much of a voice.
Right. And that was not just not having a voice, but not ever, like in my brain, there's never been just even like a start of that skill, is how I kind of think of it. That skill has never been built.
Yes.
Until, afterwards. Now, I did have you, who was a very good parent. I said this like a while back, where
I'm
it was
smiling.
With an abusive parent and then the non-abusive parent, if that is the situation, the setup that it is. The non-abusive parent, like you, were very caught up in still having to spend most of your energy on my dad and not your children.
Yes.
And how that can take away from, some of the extra attention that the children would need. But as I've said with you, you are also very, you were a teacher. You were used to handling multiple kids and knew how to handle things. So I think I got really lucky in that regard.
Oh, thanks.
But for sure, I definitely feel the effects of this is to my core. I never learned foundational skills of being a human.
Yeah. And I do feel like I kind of am the same, not to the same extent.
Right.
I did not grow up in an environment that was abusive or controlling. Just my personality, I'm a people pleaser, and I like everyone to be happy. I like to be happy. And
for sure.
So I think I never learned that boundary making was essential.
Right.
It was almost like I have to be really angered that much. I have to be pushed that far.
Yes.
That I'm going to set a boundary.
Yes.
Woohoo. And now I know that that's, like you said, it is a skill, a life skill.
It absolutely is. You're having to build the synapses in your brain, the neurons, whatever. Neuroscience.
That's true.
It's genuinely something that you have to build like a muscle. Just like any other social skill or anything like that.
I mean, you think of debate class or something like
yes.
that. That is definitely something you have to practice. Most people are not just naturally born great debaters.
Right.
Either they don't want to argue or they get too emotional. It's something that you have to figure out all the components. And I think that is very similar because it's very emotionally charged.
Right. And it's something that you have to be aware of, in the moment. And it's all just very difficult when you don't have that sort of practice of okay, what are we feeling right now? Is this an unreasonable response that I should just go walk away and cool off for a little bit? Is it a perfectly reasonable response where I can just say, hey, let's not do that, right? And these are all just skills that you have to practice and learn, and that's really difficult when either you've never had them or maybe you had a little foundation but it got broken down by abuse, because that's also, again, just like muscles, it can still atrophy even if you had it from the start.
I would even go a step further and say not a skill that you developed, but it was almost taught that you should not have that skill.
Right.
You weren't supposed to talk back. And you were supposed to always follow directions and be the good child.
Yes.
And you didn't have that ability to say, wait, time out, I'm upset. I need to take a break or whatever. Yeah.
But it's interesting for me to think because I was still social outside of the household. I went to school. I had friends at school. I had teachers. But I still always felt that way, even though I spent 8 hours a day, 5 days a week at school.
But you're also in another situation, another environment where you were not in control.
True. You do have a lot of rules on you in school.
I just had a sudden thought. Again, a tangent. and I can't remember what movie it was, but I saw a movie where a girl was in high school and she had been homeschooled her whole life, and in high school she went to public school. And she got up to leave the room, and the teacher's like, "Where are you going?" And she's like, "I'm just going to go to the bathroom." He's like, "No, you're not." And she's like, "I'm not allowed?"
Yeah. And that's one of those things that people talk about a lot with school, about how we're telling children not to go to the bathroom when they need to.
Right.
It's understandable from a perspective of there's not enough teachers to the number of students in order to make sure that students aren't just going and goofing off. But it's also teaching all these children, you do not have autonomy over your bodies.
Right.
And that's something that I still very much feel. I have had, some anxiety with just like going to not school, not work, but just like events. And I'm like, but what if I'm not allowed to like get up and leave? What if I'm not allowed to like go to the bathroom, even though I've had, stomach issues in the past? That's just part of the whole system of a lot of people don't get to practice that autonomy over their own bodies, over their own well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's so true. I know that I don't know how to explain it, but I start taking your younger brother to baseball on Saturdays. Mm-hmm. And after baseball, I would go and visit my boyfriend who's recently come home from the hospital. I found that I was stressing myself out, rushing around because baseball's supposed to be over by 12 and I should be home by 1 and then I should at a specific time. It wasn't anything he put on me. He certainly wouldn't want me to rush at all. He would want me to take my time and just enjoy life and relax. But I had been in an environment for so long where my time was not really my own.
Right.
If I was done with work at 6 o'clock, I needed to be home at 6:10. No questions. Or else I had to call in and get permission to run by the store or things like that. And it's that sort of thing to me that I feel like has been a big learning thing for this 50-plus-year-old person. Like, my time is my own.
Right.
And I don't have to check in unless it's an unreasonable amount of time,
Yeah.
I kind of had to set a boundary for myself, not for anyone else.
Right.
But I had to just go through the motions of thinking it through and saying, you know what, baseball ends at 12. Sometimes it ends at 12:05.
Oh, no.
And I'm going to be a little bit later. And the world will not collapse. Mm-hmm. It's all going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And so I had to kind of create, and this is just in the last few weeks I've done this. Yeah. It's a constant evolving skill.
It really is.
But I had to create that boundary for myself because I wasn't helping anybody. I wasn't making anything better. I was just putting more stress on my own shoulders.
Yeah.
So,
again, it's kind of the way that our brain grows around abuse and that kind of a thing, where every time something happens and there's a cause and an effect, your brain is growing around that. So
that's true.
When you are growing up with growing up in your 30s and such, but when you have that experience, you are physically learning that the consequence of being late is dire. And so when there's not an external force to do it, your brain is still absolutely wired to do it to yourself.
Yep.
It's really easy to just kind of do the abuse back to yourself.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you have to be like, okay, is it helpful to be calling myself stupid right now? Or is it helpful to be, saying... That's a big thing that I notice with myself and some other people that I know. It's like the negative self-talk.
Oh my gosh, I call myself stupid all the time.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that when I'm going through a rough time, I will literally be waking up in the morning hearing myself call myself stupid.
Yes. And that's exactly that sort of negative self-talk.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You have that too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, waking up and feeling that?
I don't know if I wake up like that. I have that in a lot of moments. Because you and I had different things being controlled about us.
Yes.
I mean, and again, that's something that that's just your brain. Like I always say, it's like the dad in my head.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's physically there, and that doesn't mean it's impossible to get rid of. You can absolutely, again, whole muscle analogy. If your skill to set boundaries can atrophy, so too can the pathway in your brain that's telling you to talk negatively to yourself. But in order to reach that, you have to stop yourself from talking negative. It's not going to just go away without, if you keep practicing it.
Right. And I have to say that the best way that I have practiced is with my therapist, because I don't have the confidence in myself to say, okay, honestly, the whole baseball scenario that I just talked about.
Right.
I had to talk about it with her.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the one like, why are you feeling stressed about time? I said,
right.
I don't know. It's just how I'm made. And she's like, no, that's just the way you have been taught.
Formed.
Yeah, informed. And so, you know, I'm a big cheerleader for therapy. I just feel like it's impossible to be able to, well, I shouldn't say impossible, but it's really hard to get enough tools together to help yourself without having that external person.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely therapists out there that aren't the best, but I think when you find a good therapist, it very much is helpful to have like a coach.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I'm
just gonna keep talking about like sports and muscles. I'm really gonna sound like I'm like an athletic person. I'm not. The sport I did in high school was marching band, but just that idea of like, yeah, you can work out on your own, but you're not gonna push yourself as much as you would with a coach, you know, over your shoulder telling you to like do this and do that. Sometimes you will resent the coach even. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you will be like, oh, I don't like what my therapist just said.
Yeah.
But also for those of us with low self-esteem, we might also be like, oh, they're probably right, and I'm just... But then you can also fall into that spiral of, therapist is right, I'm just stupid, my brain just sucks.
Okay, if a therapist ever tells you you're stupid...
No.
Run
away. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying walking away from the therapy session.
Okay, yeah.
Afterwards, your therapist said, I think, or I see this pattern, blah, 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 and you're walking away like, either like, I didn't like what they said, or if you're saying... They're right. I just can't even do this by myself. And that can become its own.
Yeah.
That was two separate concepts being tied together there in my brain. But yes.
I love your brain.
Thank you.
Your brain's amazing.
Thank you.
Well, we had kind of talking about boundaries for our first topic.
Yes.
And so I was thinking of an example that I could bring up. The one I came up with is driving in the car, because I have PTSD and I'm easily triggered.
Right.
And especially by loud noises. So one of the very first boundaries that I came up with was, if there's any motorcycles within the block of me, I must have all the windows up.
Right.
And I like to have the windows down and have fresh air going through, but that was something that I had to set, because I would melt into a little puddle of goo and cover up my ears, and it was unsafe.
Right.
And so I had to create that boundary. Now it seems like it's something very simple. Most people wouldn't even think about that. They would think, if it's noisy, put the windows up.
Right.
But I'm so used to not making decisions for my comfort.
Yes.
That, it's like, well, no one else is bothered by it. What's wrong with me?
Right.
So that was like the first boundary that I can remember really setting here in my new life. And then I took it a step further, where I've had to ask people who are in my car with me to lower their voice.
Yes.
And that's not the same situation at all, because it's not causing me to take my hands off the steering wheel and possibly be dangerous. But the discomfort for me, if somebody is yelling in my car, even just yelling in joy, it's the same effect on me. I still get triggered, and my pulse is racing, and I'm having a hard time breathing. It's
hard. Yeah.
So I had to do two different kind of boundaries in my car, just to make it healthier for me.
Yeah.
And one is definitely a boundary for myself, keeping those windows up and telling everybody, get those windows up.
Yeah.
And then the other one is a boundary I set for people who are in my car. And
Yeah.
I've had to say, I'm sorry, can you quiet down just a little bit, you know?
Right. Always said in the most just absolutely ruthless way.
Yeah, I'm ruthless.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always called myself a marshmallow. I'm kind of a marshmallow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's all part of it.
But I'm a marshmallow with boundaries now.
We're making s'mores and you put it in the fire on purpose and it has a crisp edge around it.
I love those marshmallows. They're the best
I know
ones.
you do. They're crows.
Oh, they're the best.
No!
I like the crispy marshmallows.
Well, that's what you are now. Congrats.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. I love it. Okay, what's a good example of a boundary that you've set?
Well, I was actually going to just, not one I've set, but one that you've set.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
I'm getting called
Uh-oh,
out.
you're getting called out. No, I was just talking about the car thing, because I don't know if you remember this, but late last year, there was a time where you were driving me to the doctor, and I had a panic attack in the car.
Oh, I do remember this.
Yes.
Yes.
And when I'm having, or it wasn't a full-blown panic attack, it was just like at the edge. I have ADHD. I am very fidgety. And it gets so much worse when I'm really anxious. So at that point, I was like trying to take sips of my water and then closing the lid really loudly. I was trying to breathe, but anxiety makes it hard to breathe. So you interpret it in your brain as like sounding upset.
Yes.
And it was just all these things that were triggering you. And obviously, we were both uncomfortable in that situation.
Yes.
Afterwards, you were like, I don't know if I can keep driving you places. You might have to start taking Ubers. And I am not the best with rejection. So for a moment, I was pretty upset about that. But then I came back to it and I was like, okay, we can work something out a little bit more. So we sat down and we talked about like, okay, what was the triggers here? Because I can have anxiety without
triggering
your anxiety. We just talked about like, okay, because I haven't had anxiety attacks like quite that bad in a while, but that was a morning where I was having stomach issues. Mm-hmm. And that was something I knew before we got into the car. And so it was kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, if I'm starting to feel that way, I should sit in the back seat. So anything I do is, not right next to you.
Right.
All these like little things. And, okay, I ended up buying a new water bottle because the other one I was having to close shut really loudly because the top was just kind of broken.
You had to buy a new water bottle for me.
Oh no. Big deal.
But it's a big deal to me that you love me enough to do that.
Of course. But that's one of those things where it's like, it's a negotiation, but it works between us because we do have a certain level of trust.
Yes.
And that's also kind of an important factor.
Yes. And I can say with pretty much 100% certainty that if you hadn't been receptive...
Yeah.
Me being the marshmallow I am, I would not have stood firm with that boundary.
Right.
And it would have not been a good thing.
Right. Because, if you have a panic attack in the car
while
you're driving, that would not be good for either of us.
Right.
Generally, that's true of even the little... It doesn't have to affect me to the extent of, we could get into a car crash if I keep doing something, right?
Right.
It can also be like, it's not great if you get just upset by something, just hanging around at home. It's not hurting physically anybody, but that's still worth the time of setting a boundary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the fact that you respected that boundary.
Of course.
Because it doesn't come easy for me to set boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. And because the thing about boundaries is setting them is not as major a step as enforcing them.
Yes, that is so true.
And that's an issue.
It is so true.
Because that, what I was saying before about kind of like the whole definition of boundary setting, where I also went off topic.
Which we do.
Which,
it's part of our charm.
This was my boundary. I said, hey Mom, if we're doing this podcast, we need to write an outline ahead of time because otherwise I will talk about literally anything but the topic.
But But that's okay.
It's okay. That's not a boundary, that's an accommodation. Setting a boundary isn't controlling what somebody else does. You know?
Yes.
It wouldn't be a boundary for you to just say, you can't have an anxiety attack in my car. I can't control that.
Right.
The boundary is, if you have this anxiety attack and you're triggering me, I'm going to get anxious.
Right.
I'm going to have this response, and it might not be safe, and we might have to pull over, and we might end up having to be late. And all that's fine. You know, like,
right.
If that happened, absolutely pull over and calm down first.
Let's not get into a car accident.
No.
Yes.
But that's kind of one of those things where that is the thing that you have to uphold. You have to, in the moment of being uncomfortable already, do something that you feel like you're not supposed to do.
Right.
And that's very much where the hard part comes in. I'm trying to think of like a personal example, but the example that keeps coming to mind is my ex, who was horrible at setting boundaries, as you know.
Oh, yes. I do know this.
There was a point in time after we had broken up where my ex told one of our mutual friends that if he brought up a specific type of conversation while me and my ex were both there, my ex would then leave the conversation. That conversation still did come up. I don't know why my friends still did that. And instead of my ex leaving the conversation, as they said they would, they just got really upset and then yelled at my friend. And that's not what boundary setting looks like.
No.
The boundary setting would be, if that happened, they got up and left, right? And
which is what they had already articulated.
That is what they said. That is the boundary that they set, was, I will leave. The point of upholding a boundary is, if it happens, then you leave.
Right.
You don't just get mad that everything didn't go exactly your way. Mm-hmm. You have to be like, okay, I have a response. I guess that's part of my point here, is part of boundary setting is setting a response to something happening.
Oh, that's good. So it's not just, I can't deal with this, but it's
what if you do this, this is
mm-hmm.
what you can expect. And that's not as, it doesn't sound like it's as firm.
Right.
Like, you know, me telling you, if you take me to a very loud place, I will get really angry at you, and you can't take me to a very loud place ever.
Oh, okay.
Ever. That's not as powerful as a boundary as, if you take me to a really loud place, I will get overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. I will probably want to leave very quickly. Mm-hmm. I might have to wear my earbuds or earplugs while I'm there. And then expect maybe for me to be kind of boring afterwards. That's the word I usually use when I'm overwhelmed and kind of chilling, is I'm being boring. You know, that's kind of like a setup of expectations that I can give you. And I can also say, like, hey, if you do this, I will be very overwhelmed and have a terrible day at work tomorrow. If you choose to then take me to a very loud place for some reason, first of all, I'll be like, okay, we need to maybe reevaluate our relationship here. But the idea is, you can't be mad that I'm then very tired the next day or cranky or whatever, because that's the expectation that was set.
Exactly.
For me, that's like difficult to be like, okay, I said I would be tired today. I'm allowed to act that way because, you know, it's not a punishment thing. It's not like I'm punishing you.
Right.
This is entirely hypothetical. This has not ever happened. But
we're going to a concert.
Oh, yeah. Indoors and everything that I hate. Yeah. The hope is whoever you're building a relationship is understanding.
Mm-hmm. But I like how you're saying that, because it's less controlling.
Yes.
It's not saying you can't act this way around me.
And that's harder to enforce.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's got a definite boundary.
It's a boundary. It is literally cause and effect. Again, I was talking about the parenting thing. If you do this, this is what's going to happen, and you can't smudge the response. You have to give the response that probably will happen. You know, you can't know exactly what will happen, but they also cannot then.
They can't say you're overreacting.
You're overreacting. Yeah. Like, no, I told you what would happen here.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if they aren't understanding, then that's a point where you have to reevaluate the relationship.
But I also think you make a good point by saying, if this happens, I'm doing this I'm taking this action for me.
Yes.
So you're not punishing them.
Correct. It's not supposed to be a punishment.
Right.
Now, abusers will take it as a punishment no matter what.
Right.
That's, again, on them. And you can be like, okay, if you can't handle this amount of rejection or my imperfection, maybe you need to go to therapy. Or, you know, depending on the, you know, exact relationship.
That kind of brings up something that I discussed in my therapy session yesterday. It was talking about, I have autoimmune disorder, and I've always had kind of fragile health, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And I remember going to this place, and it was raining, and we were supposed to be outdoors, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's cold and rainy. I'm not going to go outdoors. I'm going to get sick.
Yeah.
And all the people I was with said, you know, that's just a myth. That's not real.
Right.
Being cold and wet doesn't make you sick. And at the time, I didn't know I had autoimmune issues.
Right.
And I just said, well, you know, it just seems like it always works that way for me. And they're like, oh, you're wrong.
And it's technically true.
Right.
Technically, if you're cold and wet, in a vacuum, you won't get sick. But it does lower your immune system.
Which I already have a wacky immune system.
Correct.
So that was kind of my whole early years, was I would try to kind of set a boundary.
Yeah.
But there was nothing I could do. There was no response I would give.
Yeah.
It's like, well, then I'm just going to get sick. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Take that.
Take that.
So, I mean, I think it shows that you have to have the different components.
For sure.
But you also need to respect people's boundaries.
Yeah.
Because just because someone else wouldn't get sick doesn't mean that it's a myth.
Right. And in that situation, the boundary you would be setting would be like, if y'all can't honor my health, my requests, then I won't be going out with you. Or I won't be doing spontaneous things with you. I will drive in my own car, and if we start doing something I don't like, I'm leaving.
My child is wise. The lines get blurred with somebody who has anxiety and is trying to say, these are my boundaries, but then they go too far and say, my boundaries are telling you what to do.
Right. That's definitely something that happens. And it becomes such a difficult thing because it's like, it does genuinely cause them distress for that boundary that they set to be crossed. Again, abusers, or just a lot of people with different disorders. You know, a lot of us live with a certain level of distress and things that others don't necessarily have. It's like any little bit of distress somebody else caused is like impossible to get over. And that's not healthy.
Right.
When you're friends with somebody, partners or family or whatever relationship it is, there's going to be disappointment. There's going to be like tiny rejections. You're going to have a friend who says, I don't really want to do that thing with you. I'm sorry. You know, there's going to be these little things. And those can kind of hurt, but that's not necessarily a reasonable boundary to draw.
Right.
If y'all do this, I'm going to leave situation. You can't say, y'all are not allowed to do spontaneous things. Y'all aren't allowed to dance and sing in the rain because I will get sick.
That's right.
Like, you would probably feel bad driving away alone, knowing your friends are having fun.
Right, but
out in the rain.
That's my power in myself, that I can make that decision to safeguard my my me.
But the lines definitely get blurry and complicated, and
it does. It does. And I think it's important to always remember that everyone's going through something.
Oh, for sure.
So everyone has their own anxieties, and they might not look completely different than ours.
Right.
That's no less important.
Yep.
Do you have a process of creating boundaries?
No, I should.
I think for me, my biggest thing still is acknowledging the need for a boundary.
Right.
For the PTSD, that's an obvious one.
Yeah.
But there are so many other times that I'm like, well, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, and I don't want to, put somebody else out. So I'm still working on just recognizing when it's important. Right.
And I do think this is like, it's related.
It's another tangent.
Sort of. It's one of those things where, like, having like a diagnosis of PTSD, or for me having a diagnosis of ADHD, or also for you having the diagnosis of your physical health issues, having those diagnoses really helps you with being able to be like, okay, I'm allowed to need certain accommodation, I'm allowed to need blah blah blah. But when you don't have like a diagnosis or something that specifically applies to one need, it can be kind of tricky to identify that.
That's true.
But I mean, even in that case, I do sometimes have to make boundaries for you with your your physical health.
Oh yeah, I'm not good about that.
No.
Because I think I should be able to do more than I do.
See, that's an example of, if I do this, then tomorrow I might be tired.
Yeah.
That's kind of the same process.
And it's hard for me because of the environment we were living in. I was expected to do everything with a smile on my face.
Absolutely
and
everything.
Never have a bad day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was even told, because I was going to probably be disabled as I got older, that I needed to do all the work now because he was going to pick up the slack later on. Mm-hmm. Which is
totally his personality and ability, and he definitely didn't burn my soup that one time.
He burned your soup? How do you burn soup?
On the stove. He spilled it on the stove is what happened.
I'm actually amazed they were trying to make you soup.
Well, they weren't. I was making my own soup, and then I had a stomach issue. I was like, I need to run to the bathroom now. Can you make sure, just turn off the stove when it's boiling, right? Yeah. Very simple process. This was canned soup. It wasn't a big deal. But I was in the bathroom for a while, and I just hear my dad and my brother, and they're talking, and my dad's saying like, oh, we'll put it in a bowl and take it up, and they just spilled some of the soup all over the stove. And it was on the stove for forever.
Oh my gosh.
Like the last time I was at the house, there was still like the burn marks on the stove.
Oh my gosh.
Like, not a man who was actually going to pick up the slack.
He burnt the soup.
He couldn't pour the soup into a bowl is really what it was.
So, for our audience, you can all tell that we have to create boundaries. It's very important.
Yes.
Have you ever had your boundaries ignored?
Yeah. And a sentence. No.
Move on.
Move on. Trying to think of an example that I can appropriately discuss.
Well, I had a situation recently where I was trying to create a boundary and I was having a hard time figuring out what that boundary was going to be, but it was important because it was about me feeling safe. And feeling safe is just a really big thing for me. I struggle with that.
Right. So
I created a boundary, and then I had another person who doesn't know me all that well kind of try to talk me out of it.
Right.
Try to say, it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
And do you really need to do this? Because what's going to happen? And I was like,
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe this is true. Maybe I'm just being really selfish. But no.
That was another tangent.
I love tangents. Tangents are awesome. Do you have a time when you should have set a boundary but you didn't?
Oh, yeah.
I think everyone can say yes to
definitely everybody. And I mean, that's something that people, that's kind of like just living life. I definitely, again, just thinking about that last ex, part of my problem with them was they were texting me constantly.
Yes.
We dated for like 6 weeks.
I know, it wasn't
It was not a long relationship, and I was already being expected to text every single day. I think after a month of dating, we kind of like talked over the relationship, and one of the things that I brought up in that conversation was I need my phone constantly blowing up with messages that just say hi.
Yes.
Especially because I was going through a stressful time here at home during that whole 6-week relationship. I was just like, this is really overwhelming for me. I'm spending a lot of time with family right now. I just need
space.
A little bit more space. I need to not have... If you have something that you really want to say to me, say the thing to me. Don't just say hi. I didn't word it like that, but that was what I was feeling.
Right.
Their response was, yeah, I just felt like I haven't gotten enough attention from you. Again, this was our month. I think it was like specifically on like our month anniversary or whatever. A month into a relationship, you're not texting me every day. I don't feel like I'm getting enough attention.
Wow.
Since that relationship, I sat in on like a virtual discussion about relationships, specifically lesbian relationships, and how people talk about it being like burning really fast and like the limerence, and just how a lot of women tend to be more...
Wait, what was that word you just said?
Limerence.
Limerence. I don't know what that word is.
It's like when you're falling in love and it's like the super like, oh, I always want to be talking to them and blah, blah, blah. It's not love.
Limerence.
Limerence.
I like that word.
I don't have the exact definition pulled up, but it's, you know, it's a fun thing, but it can also lead to kind of moving too fast.
Yes.
And that's a big thing with like queer relationships between women. So much so that it became like a whole stereotype. But one of the things that was like brought up was like, you need to have kind of a roadmap for the beginning of a relationship where it's take things slowly.
There's no reason to rush.
Yeah. You don't need to be talking more than once a week.
Once a week?
Yes.
Wow.
Go on a date once a week. You don't need to be texting all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with my boyfriend who was unnamed.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we first started dating, it was, once a week.
You don't have to be that into it at first. And I know it's a different situation because I had already been talking to my ex before we started dating for like a couple weeks.
Right.
Even then, it doesn't have to be an everyday conversation. It doesn't have... I mean, you might want to text every once in a while, but it doesn't have to be a full conversation every single night. You know, wait a little longer for the first kiss and all these little things where it's like, if you wait and don't just fall for the, yeah, I'm in a relationship, you know, you'll actually kind of be like, am I clicking with this person? And so that's been a big thing where I'm trying to, well, I haven't dated since then, but for future relationships and even for friendships, I'm trying to be a little more like that, because even though it's not limerence per se, there's still kind of that initial excitement of getting to know a new friend.
Sure.
And, you know, you want to make it known that, hey, I like you, come hang out with me, but not setting this expectation of, I'm going to give you constant attention.
Right.
And then pull away because
I burned out on giving constant attention.
Right, because, oh, that moment passed and I don't think we're actually that compatible.
Right.
And just trying to set up that slow pace of conversation.
And I would imagine that that's kind of a hard boundary to set because the other person might not be on the same page.
Yeah.
They want the limerence.
I'm nodding.
They want that.
Yes.
Because it feels good.
Right.
Yeah.
But a mature adult can handle, oh, I had a date and that was that. You know,
right.
Like, we had a good date and I don't have to be texting for affirmations, you know.
Right.
And, like, obviously, as you get further into dating, obviously you can talk more and more. There was a whole roadmap. I don't have it on hand.
It's smart. You're being intentional.
Trying to.
Yeah.
Especially as somebody who was a victim of abuse. I know that, what is it, the repetition? There's a phrase for it where people who have been abused tend to fall back into the cycle.
Right.
So, yeah, that's something that I try to do is...
You do a good job.
Well, thank you. Hasn't held true yet. Crossing my fingers.
Is there anything else you want to talk about? Boundaries?
Boundaries.
Grilled cheese sandwiches?
Yeah. We'll have to talk about grilled cheese sandwiches go good with tomato soup.
Yes, they do.
Mm-hmm. It's a whole podcast topic.
We'll start doing cooking.
Oh, yeah, great. I'm a great cook.
You don't burn the soup.
I don't burn the soup on the stove, but I do make the same type of meal every time.
That's okay.
Yeah.
If it's good, it's good.
It's good.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. It's been a lot of fun.
Yay!
Yay, I like having my Ruby Slippers with you.
Yay!
It's kind of awesome. So until we talk to you guys again, just remember, like Dorothy from Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home.
And home is where you're allowed to set boundaries.
Well said.